the actuarial valuations for the three main plans, PERS, Highway Patrol, and the Supplemental Legislative Retirement Plan. All of these valuations are done as of our snapshot date of June 30th. So all of the data, all of the financial and data is collected as of June 30th. And we're here to go through the results. I will go through a little introduction of what changed, and kind of give some key findings. I'll go through the PERS results, and then Jonathan Craven will go through the other two plans. Feel free to interrupt with any questions. So the changes for 2016, and there were only one, was the employee contribution interest rate that this board adopted to change to a basis of the money market rate as published by the Wall Street Journal at the end of each year. With a minimum rate of 1% and a maximum rate of 5%, FYI, that rate will be for 2016 is 1%. Because there is this min-max cap, we're going to assume 2%. Some years we may see above 2%, some years we'll see below. But we thought 2%, looking back at the historical rates of these money market rates, we thought 2% was a good analysis going forward. This is an assumption, so it will be added to our review of all. When we review all the assumptions every 2 years, we'll take a look at this assumption and make an analysis and see whether it needs to be changed. Key findings. As we discussed earlier this morning, market returns saw about 0.9% return for the fiscal year end 2016. However, you've heard us long enough, you know that we smooth those gains and losses over a 5-year period. We'll go through a chart that really helps explain why we do this, but it allows for better budgeting on contribution rates, and the return on that over the 5 years was actually 7.2%. We've had two 15 and 16 fiscal year ends were not good market returns, but the prior years before that were good. So our actuarial value return is very close to what we assumed, 7.5. 7.5, sorry. So you will see a little bit of a loss when we go through the gain loss analysis on the investment rate of return. But you know, in the past couple of years, you've seen some gains in the investment return. The change in the assumption for the employee contributions did have a minimal decrease in the liabilities, which I think you'll see in a little bit. The funding ratios are just slightly down for the PERS and the Highway Patrol, but it is up for the Supplemental Legislative Plan. I added this slide just to go through and put it in terms of words instead of just numbers that you see in the gain loss, and to kind of help explain what we're seeing and what helps us when we do the experience every 2 years. PERS experience losses in retirements and withdrawals. What does that mean? It means basically PERS, the plan, had a loss in retirements. That means either two things. We saw more retirements, so more people went into retirement status than we anticipated. And we all know that when folks go into retirement status, it costs the system more, especially if they go in early. Because now they're in pay status, they're collecting COLAs a little bit earlier than we may have anticipated. It also could be that what we valued as their active benefit, and when they retired and went to retirement status, pay was different. They actually had some extra service that we weren't aware of, or something like that. So we could see some liability shifts there. Losses and withdrawals on the system means that folks didn't withdraw from PERS like we thought. We actually saw less terminations than we thought. So we saw more retirements and less withdrawals than we actually anticipated. And what we do is we look at this analysis every 2 years, and that's why we make adjustments in our assumptions. We do them every 2 years, so we're not making very big changes. But this is the kind of stuff we're looking at. PERS also saw mortality gains, which is means more deaths than we're actually anticipating for PERS. We don't typically see that. We're seeing, it seems to be in the South, because I was just in Kentucky and the same thing happened. So that we're definitely seeing better mortality throughout the country. Folks are living 1 to 2 years longer than they did in the past. New folks are living longer than old folks live. But what we do, again, in our assumption and experience study is kind of try to base a mortality table where we're projecting out, where we're not having every year losses or every year gains. We're trying to balance that table in all of our assumptions. So some years we're having gains and some years we're having losses. So not a big surprise here with what we based our mortality assumption. The Highway Safety Patrol experienced losses due to the salary increases. They passed legislation that got them some rather large step increases for their officers this year. Jonathan's going to go into further detail. So that does increase liabilities significantly for that group. But what it does is it actually helps the projections out, which we'll see in December. By having more pay and on a 37% fixed contribution rate, that's going to mean more contributions coming in. We kind of discussed a little bit of that this morning. So I'll let Jonathan go through the rest of that in his presentation. And then we had an election year for the legislative plan this year. Resulted in significant turnover. I think 20% of the population, 175 members, was actually turned over this past year either by retirements or withdrawals, which actually led to some gains that we anticipated more. So, and the amortization for that plan is looking pretty good. We're still under 30 years for that plan. We actually dropped another year. So that plan is the 7.4% fixed contribution rate is really working and getting that to a better funded position. So the PERS plan, go through some data. This is a look at the last 5 years of active and retirees and an active to retiree ratio. We saw another drop in the active membership this year, another 3,000 less active members. It's kind of all over the lot. We didn't see it in one specific employer group, kind of state agencies or schools. Kind of saw a decrease across the board here. Retirees are up about 3,000. So the ratio is about 1.5 active to retiree ratio.
And if I can just interject here.
Yeah, sure.
Just, it's interesting that we see a decrease in the active membership and active population. And I think one of the things that could be contributing to that is we now have over 6,000 individuals, retirees who are working part-time. And so there's probably some of those that are taking positions that would otherwise be filled by active employees.
Right now, they do not contribute in any way to the retirement.
Actually, the employer contributes the employer contribution on the full-time equivalent salary.
Okay.
So we are seeing contributions, and that's one of the things that I've asked Kavanaugh McDonald when they look at this. We've now got, I think it's 7 years of data related to reemployed retirees and the contributions that we've collected during that time period. So I've asked them to include that as part of the experience study that they'll bring in April, just so that we can kind of see if there's a trend. Because right now, they don't have an assumption in there that we're going to get that on a regular basis. It's just, we might see some contribution increase in a gain in a particular year because of that. But we are receiving contributions for those. They are not accruing any additional liability.
Okay, does that include teachers as well? The only reason, you said a full-time equivalent, in other words, if they're working half-time, and let's say they draw in $20,000, that means the employer is paying on $40,000?
That is correct.
Okay.
All right, here we look at payroll and actual benefit payments being paid to retirees. Payroll's up about just over $6 billion here. It's up 2%. So if you consider we went down 3,000 actives, but payroll actually went up 2%. Means, you know, the current active members actually saw a pay increase. When we saw the average active salary went from 37,500 to over 39,000 this year, about a little over 4% jump for active members' average salary. Actual benefit payments went up about 6% to just under $2.5 billion. Their average benefit for retirees is just over $23,000 now. So what we do as actuaries of each system is, you know, we're projecting out a benefit payment stream for all years in the future. So we know about $2.5 billion of benefit payments are being paid this year. We know that number is going to go up next year because more folks are going to retire. But on a closed basis, that eventually will reach some kind of plateau and then will start to drop as we lose all of those active members to retirement status and those retirees to mortality. So we take that benefit payment stream, which could be for 90, 100 years or so, because we might have a 20-year-old who just started in the system and is projected out to work maybe 40 years and then to be in payment status for 30 or 40 years. We take that stream of payments and we discount it back to the valuation date. That's the total future or present value of future benefits. That's the total liability of this system, which is just over $46 billion there at the bottom. And this is what it's made of. Most of it's retiree. Over half of it is from the retiree group. The other half basically is from the active group. We have just a small piece for deferred vestings, those folks who left PERS before retirement eligible, but are entitled to a benefit when they reach 60 or 65, whenever they are eligible. And then there's a small portion, again, for inactives. Those are the folks who left before becoming vested, but decided to leave their employee money in the account to accrue some interest. Maybe they'll take it out down the line, or they've forgotten about it. So again, a very small piece of the liability there. And we're going to go through in a couple slides and say how are we funding that? Because that's what the plan is, and that's what our job is to say, how are we going to fund that $46 billion? So let's look at what we've done over the last 10 years as far as the assets are concerned. It's been, as you can tell, it's been a very volatile 10-year period, including we're still showing you 08, 09. I can't wait for 3 more years until we don't have to show that anymore. But we've still seen some volatility even since then. We've had some really good years, and in the last 2 years, we've seen that green line below $1 billion in investment returns. We need to have that number more in the $2 to $3 billion range to accumulate some assets. We have about $1.6 billion coming in, the contribution. You see that's been going up. And then the red line we show as a negative number. Those are the benefit payments going out. And that's about $2.5 billion. This is a look at the 2 asset values. I just mentioned it a little bit earlier, is why we smooth assets on an actuarial value basis over a 5-year period, is to avoid the peaks and the valleys. Typically, in bad market times, the actuarial value will be higher, and in good market times, the actuarial value will be lower. It helps smooth out those gains and losses, and that's what we're seeing now. The actuarial value was below the market value since 2012, basically, but now this year it did go above it. $25.2 billion in market value for PERS as of June 30th, 2016. So again, this is how we're going to finance that $46 billion. Most of it is currently in assets. We've got about $25.2 billion in assets on an actuarial value basis, a little bit less on a market basis, but let's look at the actuarial value basis. Then we have 2 small slivers there on the left. That's our future normal costs, all right, being paid by current member contributions of 9% and current employer normal costs of about 2.2%. As of the valuation date. That's the present value, those dollars there are the present value of those amounts going forward of the future salaries of active members. So that totals about, in total, about $4.5 billion of this. The rest, the $16.8 billion, is the unfunded accrued liability of PERS. Last year, that number was about $16 billion, so we've grown that unfunded accrued liability just a little bit. Again, it's due to market losses that we've seen in actual value. And we'll go through that on the next slide. So that's the plan. That's the 2%, the 2.2 is going towards paying for those accruals for active members. The remaining part of that 1575 is going to pay down or help pay down that green portion of the pie chart here. And it is over, it will, if everything was to remain constant or based on our assumptions for the next 36.6 years, that difference would pay off that unfunded. So here's a look at the gains and losses that occurred. Now this is just a 1 year basis from 15 to 16 fiscal year. What happened? We had a little bit of an investment loss, 7.2 compared to the 775. So it's $155 million loss. To put that number in perspective, it's only about 0.3% of the total liability, that $46 billion. So we're not talking yet, $155 million sounds, it's a rather large number, but when we put it into context of liabilities, it's not a very big number. We don't see this typically. We don't see very big gains and losses other than investment return because we do an experience study every 2 years. And we're really trying to hone in on keeping these gains and losses as minimal as possible. We did see a little bit of a salary increase gain. Service retirements, I talked about loss. Disability, a little bit of a loss. Mortality gain. New entrants always come in. We anticipate they're going to come in with 0 years of service. They typically come in on average with a half a year of service because they're hired throughout the year. So that does provide a little bit of a loss each year, but that's typical. The other is just kind of everything that isn't caught up in the other stuff. Some data changes possible, some financial, when contribution benefit payments are coming in, that kind of interest component on that. And then the assumption change, lowering that employee contribution interest rate from 3.5 assumption down to 2%, at a gain of about $66 million. So the funded ratio is down again to 60.0%. The second year now, we're down from our high back in 2014, 61. See, 12 and 13, we were also pretty far down there. Here we look at the allocation of that 1575. Again, I kind of fit these numbers, 9% on the member rate, 2.2 normal costs, 13.55 on the UAL, adds up to the 15.75% of payroll. If you add the 15.75 and the 9%, you get 24.75, and that's what's been coming in the last 4 years. And again, that, if you were to make that payment for 36.6 years, that unfunded of $16.8 billion would be paid off. It would be 100% funded. It would take 36.6 years. That did grow from last year, as you see, from 33.9 to 36.6. And this is our reconciliation of why that did that. Most of it is due to the actuarial experience, due to the losses we saw in investment return, retirements, withdrawals, new members, most of that chart is all losses. So that does increase that number of years. Normal amortization is always 1. We anticipate the 33.9 to go down by 1 every year, just the nature of paying off an unfunded. If you were to pay your actually determined contribution each year, or your ARC, we would anticipate that to go down 1 every year. The assumption change lowered it a year by lowering that interest component, just lowered it by 0.1 years. And contribution experience did lower it, and that was again due to better salary increases led to more contributions than we actually anticipated. So that did lower it just by 0.1 years as well. So the majority was the experience. Any questions on PERS? All right, I'll have Jonathan go through the other two.
Okay, first I'm going to go over the highway patrol results. Okay, here's a look at their census data. And as of 2016, we have 484 actives and 724 retirees. Now the active count dropped quite a bit from 518 to 484. There were about 30 terminations this year. So, and apparently no new class came in this year. So the count is the lowest it's been in several years. And it still rounds to the retirees, or the active count is 70% of the retiree count, but it's really 0.67. It's almost rounding down to 0.67. And here's a column chart of the payroll versus the actual benefit payments. The payroll was $27,380,000, and the benefit payments were $29,965,000. So they're running pretty close to one another. This is, Ed told you on PERS, this is a pie chart of the total present value of benefits. So the total present value of benefits of the plan is $552 million. And in theory, if all of our assumptions came out correctly, if you had $552 million in that plan, you would not need to put any more money in. That should pay out everybody that's in the plan until they die, if all our assumptions are met. The large majority of that is retiree liability, and then the active liability is next. And just like PERS, the deferred vestiges and inactives are a very, very small portion. This is the chart that graphs actuarial value versus market value. It's very similar to the PERS chart. You can see the volatility of the market value of assets. I think the standard deviation of your portfolio is like 12, 13%. So, you know, the stock market can go up and can go down quite quickly. So that's why the green line, that's why we do that, to keep the assets we use to measure the funding progress a little steadier. And here's the cash flow chart. And this illustrates, Dr. McCoy, about the net cash flow. The blue line is the contributions going in. The red line are the benefit payments going out. And the green line is the investment income, which is very volatile, as I pointed out. So pretty steady on the contributions and benefit payments, but the investment income pretty volatile. Now here's another view of the present value of benefits chart, but this, instead of where the liability comes from, this is where you're going, how you're going to meet the liability. So out of the $552 million you will need, you have $325 million in assets. The future member contributions are $17.7 million. The employer normal costs, future normal costs, $40.2 million. And the unfunded liability, which the employer will pay off through amortization payments, is $169.2 million.
I'll just point out here, the Highway Safety Patrol does have a much higher normal cost than the PERS plan. Their normal cost on an employer basis is over 16%. Again, public safety plan, you shorter, active membership period. So you have to pay off more and make that payment over a shorter period of time, so they might have a much higher, normal cost. So they're only putting in 7.25 right now, versus a total normal cost of 23%, much higher than PERS, just the story for this one.
Here's the gain loss. We had that investment loss, like I said, the actuarial value of assets returned 7.2%. Our assumption is 7.75%, so that gap is your loss there in investment return. Salary increases were quite high for the remaining highway patrol. A lot of those terminations were in the earlier years, so that created the biggest loss of all, $6 million. And they had a withdrawal gain, had a lot of withdrawals, so that caused a gain. And other than that, the big items were the salary increase, investment return. Here's the chart, column chart of the funded ratio, 65.8%, down from 66.2 the last 2 years. And that's because of the losses. And here's a look at their contribution rate. Like Ed was saying, they have a much higher normal cost, and that's the nature of public safety plans. Shorter careers, longer retirement, so you have to fund more benefit in a shorter period of time. So the member contributes 7.25%. The employer contributes 16.67 on normal cost and 20.33 on the unfunded liability. It's a total of 37% for the employer. And total rate overall 44.25%. And their amortization period is now 42.9 years, down from 45.5. And the reason it is down is because they get that money from the motor vehicle and relicensing, and that went up. And we make an assumption as to what that amount is going to be, and we have been assuming it's 3.6 million per year. But now our average has gone up, so now we're at assuming 3.7 million a year. It was just a hair under 3.9 million last year. So that's the good news on the highway patrol. Those fees are up and have actually pushed our assumption for future fees up a little bit. So they went down from 45.5 year amortization to 42.9. And again, that means in 42.9 years, if everything happens the way we think it will, they will have a zero unfunded liability and only normal costs of fund. Any questions on the highway patrol?
On slide 17, it's got the number of retirees was fixed, 724, the actives were down from 518 to 484.
Yeah.
Where'd they go?
Deaths and refunds.
What did you say?
Deaths and refunds. Deaths of retirees and refunds of some of the terminated people. So they're no longer in the counts.
What was, I have a reconciliation right here, what was the question? It was, why did the,
Yeah, it's down from 518 to 484.
oh,
Like, why didn't they end up as retirees?
The
Actives?
Exactly.
yeah, there were 9 retirements out of the 518. There were 10 deaths of current retirees. So it was offsetting. That's why you don't see the number of retirees changing. And like Jonathan said, there were over 30 people who left before retirement, whether they're vested or not vested. Especially when they all got big pay raises, it was kind of a stuff. Well, that's not tomorrow, we're meeting with them tomorrow.
So you ready to go into the legislative plan? Okay, the active count on these plan plan, 171 versus 174 last year. Retirees went up quite a bit from 185 to 207. And that caused a decrease in the ratio of active retirees to go from 0.9 to 0.8. So we're getting more legislators into retirement.
Yeah, there were 25 retirements and about 15 folks who left before they were vested. So they probably only served one term. That's right.
And here's a graph comparing the payroll of the legislators to the actual benefit payments. So the payroll still dwarfs the actual benefit payments being made out of the plan. And here's the present value of benefits slide. This present value of benefits is $24.7 billion, no, $1 million. And it's made up of retiree liability of 13.8, active liability of 9.6, and again, a small piece for deferred vested and inactive employees. And inactive employees are usually ex-employees that have left their contributions in the plan, so they're hanging around for some reason, so we have to hold the liability for them. Here's the market value, actuarial value slide. They're almost identical to one another because a lot of the assets are invested in the same way. So the smooth actuarial line, green versus the volatile market value line. Here's the cash flow analysis. Blue are contributions going in, red are benefit payments coming out, and the green line is the investment income, which is volatile.
You really see that red line drop every 4 years, it seems like. Unless we get new retirements out there.
Another look at the present value benefits of the source of how they're going to be handled. 24.7 million. Current assets, 16.4 million. Future member contributions, 1.8 million. Employer normal costs, 1.6 million. And the unfunded liability is 4.8 million. And that'll be paid off through amortization payments. The gain loss, they had a lot of gains due to retirement and salary increases were less than expected. And the investment loss that all the plans suffered, not too big a loss, but a loss nonetheless. They also had mortality gains and withdrawal gains. And new legislators caused a loss. And the funded ratio increased to 77.4%. That was due to those gains they had on their liabilities. So things are looking up, 73.6 to 75.9 to 77.4. So the sort plan is looking relatively healthy. Here's their contribution rates. Member rates, 3, normal cost for the employer, 2.87, 4.53% for the UAL. So the member rate is fixed at, the employer rate is fixed at 7.4, the member rate is 3, for a total rate of 10.4, and their amortization period is down to 22.6 years. And it was mostly due to their actuarial experience, all of the gains we just went through. So they're down from 23.6 years to 22.6 on their amortization period. And the reason we reconcile the amortization period is because the contribution rates are now fixed. So the moving piece is how long will it take to pay off the unfunded liability with that 7.4% employer rate. Prior to the current funding policy, we would ask for contribution change each year to keep the amortization period at 30 years. So that's all I have on the legislator's plan. Any questions?
Instead of 171 actives, max 175, so were these vacancies or were there anyone to, lawmakers to elect not to?
No,
You
they
know,
not.
four spots in the representative group that
Yeah.
you do some research, you sent it to her.
I asked the same question, but it was like, I knew there were some vacancies, but there were, that, you know, there were four. You had, Chairman Frierson, who was appointed to the Department of Revenue. You had, Coleman, who was now the judge, Shaw's retired, and Kimberly White, that's the fourth one, right. So, yeah, that's unusual, that's the lowest I've ever seen it at your end. I think there's still one position that has to be filled.
Any more questions?
Yes, I do have one.
Uh-huh.
Why do we call it, an unfunded liability when in our formula, we actually show that it is funded in 36 years?
Because we're 36 years away. We can't claim it.
It's in our formula to recoup that, yet we call it unfunded, yet our funding policy says, okay, if we follow all this stuff and make all this stuff happen, then, we're paying it off. We've got a formula to take care of that liability. It's just a different way of looking at it.
It's a definitely a different way. I'll take that up with the actual standards board.
And actually,
In Hardy, it's a whole lot easier to understand.
Dr. McCoy, some of us in the retirement industry say that we're pre-funded.
Okay.
And point to the 60 versus the unfunded at 40.
Well,
Yeah, but glass half full, glass half empty, whatever, however you want to look at
I
it.
was just trying to figure out, to me, it just does say that it's a liability, but we've got a way of funding it here. It's in the formula.
And that's right, you could look at it as, these are pre-funded plans, so they're better off than if they were a pay-as-you-go plan. If it were pay-as-you-go, there'd be no assets, but the employers would have to put in the total benefit payments each year, which they're not here to do right now, because they're pretty high. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Do we need to take any action to accept these actuarial reports?
We do.
Okay, I'm gonna group all of these together, that's E, A, B, and C, so if I may have a motion that we accept this report. Got a motion and a second.